Well, welcome, everyone. I know this is going to be a very exciting and productive conversation on this fantastic book, Living the Dream, New Immigration Policies in the Lives of Undocumented Latino Youth. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Duquette-Ruri. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Sociology, and it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to our esteemed panelists and authors today. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on each of the authors in the order in which their names appear on the book, so no in particular order. So Dr. Maria Chávez is currently Associate Professor of Political Science at Pacific Lutheran University. She earned her PhD in Political Science from Washington State University in 2002 and has previously held academic positions at Boise State and Seattle University. Her scholarly work focuses on American government, public policy, race and ethnicity, and Latino politics. She's published extensively in journals including Social Science Quarterly, Latino Studies, and the American Bar Association, and in 2011 she published her award-winning book, Everyday Injustice, Latino Professionals and Racism, with Roman and Littlefield. Everyday Injustice received the prestigious American Political Science Association's Latino Caucus Best Book Award, and in it she studies Latino lawyers' connections to their professions, to their community, and also the important role of education in improving the lives of Latino, along with the role of language and culture among Latino professionals. It's really an important work, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. Dr. Jessica Lavariega Monforti is still Associate Dean, is that right? You have many hats these days, I see. Yes. Associate Dean and Associate Professor of Political Science at University of Texas Pan American. She received her PhD in 2001 from The Ohio State University. You know that the is very important in political science, right? The Ohio State. In addition to these academic and administrative positions, she's also the director of the Center for Survey Research at Pan American. Dr. Lavariega's research focuses on political behavior and attitudes of women, Hispanics, and other racial and ethnic minorities. Her work also looks at immigration policy and the effects of immigration policy on identity politics, immigrants, and Hispanic and immigrant youth. Her research, which has been widely published in top-tier journals, including the journal Women, Politics and Policy, Social Science Quarterly, Social Science Journal, Politics, Science, and Political Science and Politics, I could go on, investigates the political incorporation and representation of Latinos, immigrants, and women. And when I was reviewing your work, I was, as I told you before, really struck at the focus on groups who don't have much of a voice. And so that focus on the marginalized community has really brought to the fore the important impact of their social and political incorporation. And that was really wonderful to get to know your work a little bit by researching. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Melissa Michelson. Dr. Michelson is Professor of Political Science at Menlo College. Dr. Michelson received her PhD in political science from Yale University in 1994 and was recently a fellow at Stanford Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. Prior to joining the faculty at Menlo, Professor Michelson has held academic positions at UIC in Chicago, CSU Fresno, and CSU East Bay. She's published also quite extensively. I mean, it was sort of wearing on the eyes to read your CV. I forgot how prolific you are. Extensively on everything from voter turnout in ethno-racial communities to political attitudes and behavior, participation, and political and social incorporation of Latino immigrants as well as Latino youth. Her research is published in an array of peer-reviewed journal outlets. I'll just give you a small sampling because otherwise I would need some more oxygen. The Journal of Politics, American Politics Research, Political Behavior, PS, Political Science and Politics, Political Communication, International Migration Review, etc., etc. She's also recently published an award-winning book in 2012 with co-author Lisa Bedoya, which is titled Mobilizing Inclusion, Transforming the Electorate Through Get Out the Vote Campaigns. Mobilizing Inclusion received 2 prestigious awards from the American Political Science Association in 2013. First, the Ralph Bunche Award, as well as the Race, Ethnicity, and Political Science Best Book Award for that section. So we have an incredibly distinguished scholarly panel here today that I think is going to illuminate a lot of issues that we probably care about individually. But what I think is so special about this work is both the individual and the collective wisdom they bring to this project. You know, I think we all are surprised a bit and maybe happy. I hope that's not speaking for everyone about DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but we haven't had a sense of the impact that this has on individual and collective lives and identities. So this book really brings us into a new focus through the words and the lives and people's stories. And I think the stories are beautiful, if not sometimes heartbreaking, but this is real life. This is the messy ickiness of democracy. And I really commend you for bringing these kinds of conversations to our collective understanding. So welcome to you, the participants, and to our panelists, and I know we're going to have a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to split it up. I'm going to start and set up the background for why we did this project. Some of you probably already know the answer to the question on this slide. Who are the Dreamers? The Dreamers, of course, are the undocumented youth who are in this country. They've grown up often thinking of themselves as American. They're trying to achieve the American dream. And I need to speak into the microphone. Sorry. Okay. So Dreamers have grown up in this country. They're brought here by the adults in their lives, often not knowing that they're undocumented. And then at some point they find out that they're not American and that they're not a part of this country. So for many years, the United States Congress has considered legislation that would regularize their status, and that's where we get the acronym, the DREAM Act, because in 2001, Dick Durbin from Illinois introduced the first DREAM Act that would say, well, if you've been here for 5 years, if you've behaved well, you know, you haven't gotten into any trouble, you don't have a criminal record, graduated from high school or served in the military, if you meet certain conditions, and the conditions have changed over time, that you could stay, that you would get a path to stay in America and become a citizen. And make these young people who have grown up as Americans, thinking that they're American and wanting to be American, and to let them have that American identity. But it hasn't really happened, and despite massive demonstrations and protests and hunger strikes and other actions, the Dreamers are still waiting. We got really close in 2006 with a bipartisan cooperation between Ted Kennedy, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and John McCain, a Republican from Arizona. Sorry, I'm blanking on Arizona. We got really close, and it passed the Senate, but then it got bogged down in the House of Representatives. And then, unfortunately, John McCain decided that he would like to be president. And it's really hard to win the Republican nomination when you're saying things about undocumented immigrants that aren't, you know, deport them all now. So when John McCain decided to run for president, he backed away from the DREAM Act. He backed away from the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act that almost passed Congress in 2006. And we've never gotten that close since then. So they're still waiting. The 5 million undocumented Dreamers, the 12 million undocumented immigrants who are in this country are still waiting for Congress to do something, and it doesn't look like anything is going to happen anytime soon. Well, Obama did just say something today, but we'll get back to that later. But the question arises, well, why are they here? Why are there 5 million undocumented children in this country? Where did all these Dreamers come from? Basically, it's a result of United States domestic and foreign policy. We have created the conditions that lead to undocumented immigrants coming to this country and then bringing their children here. So first of all, we have an economy that relies heavily on the labor of undocumented immigrants, and we've created an incentive system to allow employers, to encourage employers to hire undocumented immigrants using false papers or false social security numbers. The Immigration Reform and Control Act, which was signed by Reagan in 1986, punishes employees who are found to have false documents. They are then fired and deported, but nothing really happens to the employer. And employers have always lobbied very hard and complained bitterly when their employees
their workplaces are targeted. And so Congress doesn't want to interfere with employers' ability to hire undocumented workers, but they've also set the limits on legal worker visas artificially low. So the demand for the workers is there. The supply of legal workers is kept low by keeping the cap on the visas very low. And yet, IRCA creates a system that encourages people to solve that gap between supply and demand through false papers, and thus you create undocumented immigrants. At the same time that we've done all those things, we've continued to enhance border security. In 1986, in 1996, over and over again, Congress approves more and more security at the border. What that does is it blocks people from coming here, working for a season, working for a year or two, and then going back to their families. It creates, again, an incentive structure that encourages folks, once they're here, to just stay here and maybe send home money, send home remittances. But these are human beings. They're not just workers. They miss their partners, they miss their families, they miss their children. And so logically, many of them bring their children here. And so we have children coming to this country to be with the workers that we have demanded and had show up. And so there are undocumented immigrants here because of the policy decisions that the United States government has made. This is still my slide? Okay. Many of them, you changed the order of the slides. You're messing with me. I'm on camera now, thanks a lot. All right, so one of the things that comes up when you have an undocumented immigrant in the United States who's a child is should they get to go to school? And the United States Supreme Court has said, yes, you have a right to an education. You are a human being, you get to go to school. In Texas, back in the 70s, some school districts were either refusing to educate undocumented children or were charging them to come to public school. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. They get to have a free K through 12 education, doesn't matter what their status is. And the reason that that's the right thing to do is, in part, that they should not be punished for the actions of their parents, right? And that's a crucial part of it. These children, these dreamers that we're focusing on in this book, didn't come to the United States by choice. They often came as small children. 3 or 5-year-olds don't wake up one day and say, I think I'll go to America and get free kindergarten. Like, that's just not what happens, right? It's the grown-ups in their life that bring them to the United States, and they should not be punished for those actions. Now, we could talk in the Q&A about what that maybe implies for other undocumented immigrants, because after all, we are incentivizing them to come. And so should we be punishing them for decisions that we led them to take? We could talk about that later. But what we're focusing on here is the dreamers, and that the Supreme Court has said very clearly that those children are not responsible for those decisions. But Plyler only applies to K through 12. And then what? So our high schools are graduating 65,000 undocumented seniors every year. You're still undocumented. You can't get federal financial aid. You can't work. Many of them continue on to school. Some states, like California, have a state DREAM Act that allows you to get in-state tuition. Some states have some financial aid for undocumented students, but often their educational opportunities are limited. And so that's why they are demonstrating and saying, well, now what? You got us through high school, valedictorian, I'm senior president, I'm voted most likely to succeed, and now what am I supposed to do? So in 2012, you might remember that there was a presidential election. And there was a cover on Time magazine that said, Yo decido, Latinos will choose the next president. Right? Everyone was talking about this, like, this is the year. The sleeping giant, the whatever behemoth, the whatever name you're gonna call the Latino population, like, this is it. This is our year to pick the president. And the president knew it, and yet there was no comprehensive immigration reform. Congress was continuing to block it. So in the midst of that presidential election year politics, the president made a speech in the Rose Garden. Which
makes no sense to expel talented young people who, for all intents and purposes, are Americans. They've been raised as Americans, understand themselves to be part of this country. to expel these young people who want to staff our labs or start new businesses or defend our country simply because of the actions of their parents or because of the inaction of politicians.
So Obama's basically echoing the words of the Plyler decision. It makes no sense to punish his young people whose situation is a result of actions of their parents and the inaction of Congress. And so he decides to take executive action and issue DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's not the DREAM Act, it's not comprehensive immigration reform, but it's deferred action. It's 2 years of being safe from deportation and being given the ability to work. Oh, we don't have the Republicans?
No.
You guys are messing with my slides. Where's?
Oh, well, we'll just put it in.
Never mind. Oh, now I'm messing it up, am I?
Yep.
Fine. Wait.
Barry is hidden, remember.
All right, so at the same time that Obama is saying this, what are the Republicans saying? Anybody remember what Rick Perry's, not Rick Perry, start with Mitt Romney. Anybody remember what Mitt Romney's line on undocumented immigrants was?
Self-deport.
Yes, we're gonna make the conditions here so unpleasant that they will self-deport. That's not a winning strategy to get Latino votes. The only Republican during the primaries who was saying anything that wasn't about self-deportation was Rick Perry, who, when asked during a Republican debate whether he still supported the Texas State DREAM Act, said that he did, and that if you don't think that these kids who are here through no fault of their own shouldn't get an education, then I don't think you have a heart. Yeah, it was awesome. I'm sorry I don't have the clip to show you. And in the same breath, he also talked about how he was, building up security at the border, and he was against amnesty and all those things. But he was also saying, if you don't think those kids should get an education, you don't have a heart. And the other Republicans just pounced on him. It's a very unpopular, but you do not get to be, all the other mistakes that Rick Perry made aside, that is not a way to get the Republican nomination.
That's not the clip on the YouTube clip?
It is, but I don't know how to get to it.
I didn't put it into the PowerPoint. We just left it as a...
Well, I don't know how this thing works.
No, it's steam powered. Don't worry about it.
There we go.
Rick, there he is. All right, show that. Just click on it.
You just space bar.
From coming, we have high unemployment and a considerable amount of jobs going to illegals. Are you going to exert an effort to stop the abuse of U.S. citizens by illegal? Now, last year, more than 16,000 children of illegals, young people in Texas, took advantage of your in-state tuition rate. Speak to that issue, and just generally, how do you feel being criticized by a number of these other candidates on the stage for being too soft on immigration, sir?
Well, I feel pretty normal getting criticized by these folks, but the fact of the matter is this. There is nobody on this stage who has spent more time working on border security than I have. For a decade, I've been the governor of a state with a 1,200-mile border with Mexico. We put $400 million of our taxpayer money into securing that border. We've got our Texas Ranger recon teams there now. I supported Arizona's immigration law by joining in that lawsuit to defend it. Every day I have Texans on that border that are doing their job. But if you say that we should not educate children who have come into our state for no other reason than they've been brought there by no fault of their own, I don't think you have a heart. We need to be educating these children because they will be...
So, even though, thanks. Cool. So even though he says all that stuff about border security and the Texas Rangers are on the job and all that stuff, that one line about undocumented children got him in a lot of trouble. All right, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So when all this was going on, we decided, well, what are the dreamers? What is the impact on the actual students? or the people, the 5 million who are in this country in this circumstance. So we decided to ask them. We decided to look at 2 states that have a high Latino population and 2 states that are two non-traditional Latino states. So we had interviews done, and these were extensive, in-depth interviews. We trained undergraduate research assistants. Oh, they were all undergrad, right?
And graduate.
And graduate, yeah. And some of them were undocumented. Mine were undergraduate, and they were undocumented because they knew the community. And we did snowballing techniques. So they would ask, are you undocumented, and do you know a couple of other people we can interview as well? And we did the same thing in Texas and in California, and decided to ask a series of questions. How has being undocumented affected your life choices? How has, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What do you think of DACA? How will this change your life? And what is your family situation like? And also, what do you think of the president, and what do you think of the Republican contenders for president? So that's the context in which we decided to do this study. And we did the study right after DACA was announced. So DACA was announced in the middle of June, and our interviewers started interviewing them right away, like by July. And this is the information, just the demographic information from our sample. So there was a nice split between male and female. But what was interesting is you can see the mixed family status. 71% of them lived in households where someone in their household was undocumented and others were citizens. Usually it was the siblings the younger siblings who were citizens. So this had a huge impact on some of their answers and on their life experiences. Most of them, not surprisingly, are from Mexico, 97%. And this is an unusual group as well. We know that 40% of undocumented, of the 5 million, don't even make it through high school. And 97% of them had high school diplomas. 70% of our sample was in college, and almost 17% had graduate school. Some of them had 2 graduate degrees. They came very young. So that was really interesting too. They came at about 7, first or second grade, before their political socialization, before they really understand how politics works, before they understand what's going on. Then they usually found out at about middle school and high school when they were 11 or 12 years old, because that's when they started needing information. That's when they started needing their social security number. That's when they started, ironically, because they were so successful, that's when they started getting opportunities. Then they started having to decline because of their status. One of the theories that we used to contextualize our study is the theory of the white racial frame, because we saw over and over again that there are images, stereotypes, just racialized expressions of who they are. We have a quote, I can't remember the representative, who says, for every valedictorian that you have as an undocumented, you have another one going across the border with 125-pound calves because they're bringing marijuana. So these are the kinds of images and stereotypes that their life is lived under. The other theoretical framework that we used was the idea of assimilation. And we found that assimilation really, for racialized groups like Latinos, is really a one-way street. It's always about reducing and eliminating who you are to adapt to a society that doesn't accept you anyway. So that's the context in which we looked at our respondents. So the white racial frame, the melting pot, and we found that it did ring true to their experiences. So the narratives that we used, or that we've picked out to share with you, we have so many others, and sometimes during Q&A we bring up others, but the narratives are really telling. When we asked, how did you find out about your status? This person says, it was my senior year. I had all my friends leaving out for college. I was voted most likely to succeed in my high school. So it was kind of hard for me to come and stay at Pan Am, the University of Texas Pan American, which is where Jessica is a professor. And it's really unusual. The 4 different locations that we have a lot of different experiences. In Texas, you have internal checkpoints, which really amount to internal borders for this group. So you have a checkpoint north and a checkpoint south. So they're stuck in this valley, and they're very limited. They're limited physically, geographically, in many ways. One of the big themes that came up over and over again from their narratives was this sense of fear, living in fear for most of their lives. fear that if they came home from school and their parents were late, they might have been deported. And one of the things we fail to ask is, have you or anyone in your family have they ever been deported? But this came up so much. So there's always fear of deportation, the fear of being ripped away from your family, your school, or your friends. Everything you've ever known, especially if you've been here at such a young age, is really daunting and quite terrifying. So while we failed to ask this question, it came up over and over again. So that was a strong theme in our sample, that living undocumented, living in this position puts them in, has them live with a great deal of fear. And this is another one that's telling about the border. We're stuck in the border between Mexico and you can't go, you're stuck between the checkpoints and you can't go up north. I couldn't cross that stupid little checkpoint without risking it all. Leaving my mom, leaving my brother, leaving my dad. I was applying to the University of Denton. I got in, but I could not go, and I went to Pan Am. So again, how has being undocumented created obstacles in your life? We found that time and time again, it really impacted how far they could go and where they could go. Ugo's story is very interesting because he came when he was only 4 years old, and he was exceptional. He applied to all these schools, as you can see. He even got in here, and I applied to all the UCs. I got into every school. But none of the schools gave me any scholarships. I didn't get anything. They said, congratulations, you've been accepted, but I knew like I couldn't afford it. And so here, he decided to go to Cal State Los Angeles, graduated in 2.5 years, cum laude, and is now a waiter, working 2 jobs as a waiter. So a lot of wasted talent. And then when we asked him, but how will having DACA change your life? He says, oh man, you know what's gonna change? I'm actually gonna be able to apply for a work permit. And when I get a work permit, I'm gonna go straight to the DMV and apply for a driver's license, get my driver's license. I feel like part of my life is gonna be real, you know? And so that was another big thing, that all of a sudden they're gonna count. They're gonna have a number, they're gonna be able to drive. A lot of these things that we just take for granted are very difficult for them. And so just that sense that he's going to be able to get his driver's license and drive, again, something we take completely for granted, he is open now to him. And so, go ahead.
Okay, so it's important to sort of set a little bit of context here, right? What we've been having is a debate about what kind of country we live in. Are we a country of laws and rules, or are we a country of immigrants? Right? And we've sort of been playing some push and pull with that over the last at least decade. And what this results really in is, you know, our respondents feeling like they're living that debate, right? And they're living in limbo. So here's Enrique, he's 25 when we talked to him, and he says, we're living in the moment. We're living day by day, you know? We may get deported next year. We may get deported in 5 years. So how can you make a plan, or how can you plan your life if you don't know where you're going to be, right? And you know, lots of folks talked about, even if I apply for DACA and I get it, am I supposed to just plan my life in 2-year increments? How do you do that? How do you make a family and help your own family before you make your own if I can only plan in 2-year increments? And so what we see here, cover of Time, We Are Americans. Does anyone know who this person standing in the front of this picture is? Who is that?
He's the journalist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There we go. And so, Mr. Vargas, what is he known for?
Being an undocumented journalist, right?
He's an undocumented journalist, right? He's outed himself very, very publicly. He's clearly an activist in the undocumented community. He was recently arrested in my town where my university is. We had a huge number of undocumented, unaccompanied minors, and he came down to help protest and was arrested at the airport. And so what we have is this group of young people, particularly out west, more so than in Texas, with the undocumented and unafraid movement, right? And what they want to do is they want to question and push this idea of citizenship. Who is a citizen? Who gets to say who's a citizen, right? And if you look at our laws, right, there's not very many ways that you can be a citizen, right? You're born here, right? You're born to at least one U.S. citizen parent, or you naturalize, right? And most people don't really know anything beyond that. If you don't automatically fit into one of those categories, don't automatically qualify, how do you get to be a citizen? And it's really, really tough. And so they want to push this idea that, you know, if I am living the American creed. In other words, I am a good student, I work hard, I contribute to the institutions in my community, I am a part of my community, I give back. I mean, these kids were talking about tons of volunteer and community service work that they were doing. Then why doesn't that give me the right to be a citizen? If in every way, but legally, I feel like I'm a part of the society in which I'm living, which is rejecting me because I don't have a birth certificate or a social security number. So they want to push us. They want to push that debate in a different direction. And that's really important, right? Reframing that debate and reframing that rhetoric. And so we asked about identity. And so here's Daniel, he's 20, and he says, from what I was to now, like, I'm not that person anymore. Like, I'm an American. I feel like I'm an American, and that I have every right that an American has. But just because I wasn't born in this country, like, you know, I don't deserve that. Like, all these years I've been trying to be like an American as much as I could be, right? That goes to the point that Maria was making about assimilation, right? I'm born here, I've tried to live up to all of the norms in my community about what it means to be a good American, and all of a sudden I'm getting rejected sort of on all sides. And there's a real question about what the impact of that psychological damage is to that individual and to that community when we have people saying, you know, you thought you were, but you're not part of us. This is my favorite one though, Leticia, who's 21. She's in the US basically from infancy, and she learned of her undocumented status when she was 17. And so here's her response when we ask about her identity. She says, I think I'm Mexican. I mean, I don't know, like, because I'm not, like, you know, how my parents are. Here, I guess people are considered to be Mexican American either because they're born here and their parents are Mexican, or if your parents were born here and you, I don't know, because I do feel myself as American. But then I do love being Mexican because I was born here, and I kind of feel this is my home. And the interviewer says, born here? And she has to fix her own thinking, telling her own story, right? And she laughs and she says, I'm not, I mean, not born here, but you know, like, I feel like I was born here, right? So this is really powerful. She's telling her own story, and her own logic and her own mind is, I was born here, right? So we also asked a series of questions about how people felt about DACA. And we got a range of responses, and one is, we just want more than DACA. It's a good start, but it's not enough, right? So here's Jimena, she's 24 when we talked to her, and she says, it, meaning DACA, will change her life, but very slim, I think. I think it still won't provide a pathway to plan out my future or resolve my immigration status, right? Adriana is in Texas, and it's important to note that only 2 out of the 101 interviews that we did actually were in Spanish. The rest were all in English, and as a matter of fact, some of our respondents, Mexican-born, did not speak any Spanish at all, right? So that's important to remember. And so here's her response, and this is probably the most hopeful response that we received out of all of the 101 interviews, and she says, DACA es para lo mejor. Me podría estudiar y darle una mejor vida a mi hija, la que yo no tuve. O sea, cambiaría mi vida por completo, right? And here is the English translation. It is for the best. I'll be able to study and give my daughter a better life, one that I did not have. In other words, it would completely change my life. I think it's important to just think about how dire someone has to see their situation as being that a 2-year deferment for deportation will change their life, right? I mean, I just think that's huge. Okay, here's another one talking about the danger of DACA. And she says, it's a gamble we're taking. We're already letting the system know we're here. So we're pretty much asked to be in limbo for 2 years, and then at the end of those 2 years, we might be at their mercy. And then they can ask for another 2 years. And at the end of the day, it's politics, and we're at the mercy of congressmen. Remember that when we're talking to these folks, the presidential election still has not been decided. We don't know that Obama's gonna win another term. And so everyone is kind of thinking, if Romney comes in, because this is executive action, and we all provide them with all of our information, they're just gonna come and deport all of us. Not just us, but we had to give them information about where we live and our parents and where we've worked. And we're putting our entire family at risk by applying for this program. And so this is probably the best, I think, sort of political analysis that was given to us by one of our respondents. And this is Mateo, who's 22. And he says, we're not just chess pieces that you can just, move around any way you want. We're actually human beings. We have, dreams, we have aspirations. So just knowing that they're kind of taking this at a political level is really angering me to know that, even though, yay for this, it's still like knowing the steps behind it, the reasons behind it, they're not helping us, right? There's this argument that's happening that's saying, basically, this is symbolic politics on Obama's part to try to get citizens who are Latinos to vote because he did something. He did the least that he could do. And so that will get people to turn out at the polls. But that the ultimate situation of the people, even those who qualify for DACA, is not going to be resolved by this, right? And feeling like they're sort of being played with, right? Talking about being chess pieces.
So we've shared some of the narratives that we had in our findings, but it really highlights the right racial frame and the story of a racist exclusion that this group of kids has, that at every stage of their lives, they're being told, we don't want you here. You can't get a driver's license. You can't go to this scholarship thing. You can't go to this college. You can't even cross a checkpoint. So here we have people who, ironically, because they've been undocumented, have never even visited Mexico again because it would put their family at risk. So you have people who are even less connected with Mexico than if they had had the ability to have that, to travel. So their story really exemplifies racist exclusion, because how can we have 5 million people living in this situation? And it also points to the fact that to have a truly ethno-racial democracy, think of the demographics. Latinos are going to be 30% of the nation by 2050. Yet we're going to continually exclude them as citizens. So while other groups have come, and a nation of immigrants, we have not seen Latinos as citizens in waiting. Rather, we've seen them as temporary workers for ages. Even Latinos who are citizens and have been here for generations. So Latinos are excluded as potential citizens. And if we really want an ethno-racial democracy, we have to find a way to include Latinos, to change the way we think about Latinos. We have to have a shift in the way we view Latinos if we really want a true ethno-racial democracy. Because the demographics are one framework for thinking of this situation. And we can't continue to have 5 million excluded, 65,000 new ones every year for graduating from high school with nowhere to go and without an acceptance here. So those were some of the major implications that we have from the study. And there's a couple of final quotes that highlight, some narratives that highlight this, the importance of this. Before I was, I didn't exist. I didn't have a number. So you're a shadow, but now I'm going to exist. There's going to be a record of me. I'm going to have like an identification. I'm going to have a number. So here, someone is saying, even with DACA, which isn't enough, we wanted a lot more, we now have a number. I have an identification. I'm an actual person. I count somehow. It was that important. And another one, Sarah, age 22, I'll no longer have to be scared anymore. I can feel I'm part of this country, which has rejected me so much, even though I grew up here. I went to school here, graduated with honors, I work here, pay taxes. I can finally feel like I'm going to be part of this country because I have the numbers that apparently make you part of this country. So that's the biggest one. I'll no longer have to be scared or feel like I'm living in the shadows. So again, their stories really highlight, the narratives really highlight how important it is to have not only the DREAM Act, but comprehensive immigration reform. It's not something that can be continually ignored. So we'll take some questions now. Thank you.
What do y'all feel are the preconditions that are necessary for society to turn the conversation towards not just the dreamers, which are so attractive, these kids are so innocent, they didn't do anything, but to instead focus on the parents who, as some of y'all alluded to, were driven here by not nefarious means, but motives, I should say, but by economic interests, with a decision that national origin determines, but financial necessity. You know, it's your family that needs to eat, so of course you're going to make that decision. There's a question in there somewhere. I just figured what it was.
Are we supposed to go up here to answer?
You can, however you feel most
Okay.
Well, I think the answer to that is there has to be a shift in the way we perceive Latinos. I think that not seeing Latinos as part of America is the first problem, right? That not seeing them as citizens in waiting, because you're right. By focusing on, how Melissa says, the shiny good ones, we're almost saying the parents are to blame. And we're not saying that at all. We're not saying that this is good, this is bad. Because we have a demand for the labor, yet we don't want the Mexican, right? And so we need to have a shift in that and call out the racism that exists, I think. I also think that immigration we can't just hide behind, oh, they're breaking the law. This is about breaking the law. When the law between the documented and undocumented, legal and illegal, has always been blurry for all groups, and all of a sudden with Mexicans, it's about the law. You know what I mean? And so it requires a shift in thinking of, rather than legal and illegal, it's where is the path to citizens in waiting? And where is the path to incorporating and accepting this group of people who have been here from the beginning, and we do not accept them. So we need to really, I think, have a conversation and a shift in our perception of Latinos as always foreigners and always unwanted, because and to do that you have to deal with the racism, I think. I don't know. I'm sure that there are other ideas.
I think the public opinion polls show a plurality, a strong majority of the public does want comprehensive immigration reform. It's not a problem of convincing the public. The people who are causing the problem are the Republicans in Congress. And as long as they can win elections like they just did last week by not supporting immigration reform, it's not going to happen. And so either the Republican Party needs to get their local representatives to follow the national party line of, look, we need to reach out to Latinos or we're never going to win the White House again. We need you guys to help. Or demographics will take over. And what's happening in California will happen around the country, because in California now, Republicans who represent districts with large Latino populations are saying different things about immigration and comprehensive immigration reform and all undocumented immigrants, because that's the only way they're going to keep those seats, because too much of their district believes in immigration reform and believes that these people deserve regularization as well. So I don't know that it's a new tactic that has to happen. I think it's that the Republicans need to figure out the demographics that is happening, and that's just going to take some time. Last week wasn't time yet.
Just to add to that really quickly, I think there are two other things that are really important to keep in mind. One is, this is a theme that a lot of our respondents talked about, and I sort of have coined it survivor's guilt. In that they say, well, I'm really happy that I have this opportunity, but my parents don't, or my older brother doesn't, or my cousin missed it by a week. And there's anger about that, right? That why me? And just because I was born at a certain time, it's luck, it's sheer luck, and it shouldn't be sheer luck that does that. But also another thing that one of our respondents said and picked up on is this idea of, there's this theory out there called backyards and neighbors, backyards and barbecues and neighbors. And basically what that says is, when we come in contact with a group that is new to us, but they're our neighbors or they're our coworkers, we meet them in sort of normal everyday interactions, and we find out, oh my gosh, Maria's not so bad. I can sit next to her and nothing bad is going to happen to me. And she speaks English and she's just normal, like me. All of a sudden, a lot of the racism that people feel start to melt away, right? And so one of the things that one of the respondents said was, what DACA will enable us to do, them to do, is to integrate themselves publicly into jobs that they couldn't get before, into schools that they couldn't get into before, will allow them to travel in ways that they couldn't before, and expose themselves so that people will get to know, people who've never been exposed to them before could have that interaction, and some of that sort of fear of the unknown and the racism that underlies it could go away. And so I think that's in my mind, the precondition that you sort of embedded in your question, right, is we just need to be able to talk about this in a way that is not stigmatized. And I think DACA helps that. It doesn't resolve it, but it helps that.
Please go ahead. I have a whole bunch of questions. So I'll start with this. So I've been interviewing some students at, you know, a wide range of statuses, but at some point I got the sense that some students, like you captured the students that that were DACA happened after a certain point, like after they graduated from high school when they were gonna integrate to like a university or something like that. I interviewed a student that went straight from high school to college, and he kind of missed everything that happened. Like he didn't experience the same things that other people had to struggle through. And so DACA was just like, whatever. It wasn't that important to him. It didn't seem that important. So I don't know, I guess just this study really highlights that, and I don't know that anyone else has had the opportunity to capture these stories too, so awesome. Because I feel like that's gonna shift in a couple of years. Yeah. Okay, build up to the question. So now questions. Okay, so did civic engagement come up? Like, did students feel like they became more civically engaged after DACA? Did they, like, so all this access to opportunities, and did that translate to like to their families? Because I've heard some talking about how, you know, all of a sudden I'm the only person with some sort of documentation, and I can provide access for my family for all, like, financial resources, all sorts of opportunities, right? So that civic engagement, and how does that translate to like mental health? Now all of a sudden they have all these responsibilities because of that status. So what did you hear? And I mean, is it included in this book, or yeah?
There's a lot more in the book that we didn't talk about. We definitely asked them about civic engagement.
We're political scientists.
Right. So, you know, had they volunteered for any campaigns? Were they looking forward to voting? Mostly they were pretty cynical, to be honest. They didn't even know for sure that Obama was a Democrat. So we asked them, do you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat? And this one young man said, well, what's Obama? Is he a Republican? No, he's a Democrat. Okay, then I'm a Democrat. I mean, they just really, but they know about the DREAM Act, and they knew about DACA, and they were very well informed, and they were active lobbying for comprehensive immigration reform and going to marches, especially if they were from California, and talking to their friends about whether or not to submit the paperwork for DACA and how to do it. So they were civically engaged on that one issue that related to them. But politics in general, I think some of the slides we showed allude to this. They were just really cynical about both political parties, right? DACA was crumbs, and they're treating us like pawns, and they don't really care. So there wasn't a lot of love for politics. There was interest in moving immigration reform. And I think you had some stuff about.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I'll talk about the Texas context because it's just so different than California. So, you know, here there were mega marches and, you know, shutting down downtown and, you know, all that stuff. That really, in the area of Texas where most of our respondents came from, which is the Rio Grande Valley, which is in the border area, there were no marches. So you have over 1 million Mexican origin people living in this 4-county area, and no one marched. No one kept their kids home from school. No one even acknowledged that the marches happened, right? And the really serious history of oppression in that area, and also because of the increase in border security over time, it just makes it dangerous to say that you're undocumented, right, in that area, because you will be deported, and your family will be deported, and your friends will be deported. And every person that we talked to said that they knew someone who had been or is in proceedings. And so they're like, civic engagement, what are you, crazy? I don't even want anyone to know I'm here, right? Marching, I'm not marching. They're setting up, you know, random checkpoints down the street from my house. I can't even go to the grocery store, right? So it's a really different context, I think, than here, what we saw here. And so so if I'm not going to be involved, why be informed?
I'm just struggling to like live every day, right? Like Adriana with the quote about this is the best for my daughter, right? I mean, here's a person, she's working, you know, at minimum wage, less than a minimum wage job. You know, all of them have stories of being taken advantage of by employers, being mistreated and not being able to report these kinds of things. And so for at least some in our sample, I think civic engagement was sort of considered a luxury. Now we can debate whether that is accurate or not, but I think that was the perception.
Yeah, just wanted to ask, drawing on some of your previous research on political participation and getting out the vote, it seems to me that part of the story is not just a demand-driven story, but also a supply. There needs to be a more supply-driven story about what Democrats are actually educating the public about what their positionality is. And so if DACA is perceived as crumbs, then what hope do any of us have? I mean, we might as well just put our feet up and, you know, eat some Cheetos or something. I mean, if we're relying on Republicans to do this work in the House, U.S. voters with bracketing gerrymandering, which is a real issue, especially in places like Texas. We have no hope of unseating hard, fast Republicans who have absolutely no interest in any kind of comprehensive immigration reform. So Democrats are going to have to do that bipartisan work. So I'm just really curious. I mean, knowing what you know as experts in the field on political participation in this particularly excluded, marginalized group. What kind of mobilization strategies do you think are most effective on the right and the left side of the donkeys and the elephants? Because it's just anger. It's just upsetting, you know. It's just what are you gonna do?
No, that's a common response to our book is anger and having to put the book down
and now what?
go, hit the pillow a couple times. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, because before the election last week, there was massive data coming out, especially from Latino Decisions, talking about how Republicans could get significant numbers of Latino voters if they would just move on immigration, and that Democrats could push the immigration thing and get voters. And then even in the close U.S. Senate race in Colorado, Latino Decisions surveyed Latinos in Colorado, and they didn't even know the two candidates' positions. Latinos are 14% of the electorate in Colorado, and they could have turned that Senate race to the Democrat, but the Democrat didn't campaign on immigration, didn't even say in his Senate campaign that he was for immigration reform. And so Latinos who were surveyed didn't know that the Democrat in this race was on their side, and often mistakenly thought that Cory Gardner, the Republican, was the one who was on their side. And so if candidates who could win a close race don't see the writing on the wall, I don't, right? I mean, what more could we do? We have data showing, dude, talk about immigration, you will win, and they don't do it, right? Obama didn't act before the election, right? That was so, if you look at the polling data, it's so obvious what they needed to do.
Do you think that would have actually changed turnout for that specific population?
Yeah, okay. I do,
so
specifically,
you do, okay.
Because the surveys ask people, you know, how do you feel about the Democrats? How do you feel about the Republicans? Are you planning to vote? Why are you planning to vote? Why are you not planning to vote? And Latinos were very much not interested in voting because they were pissed off at the Democrats and they were pissed off at the Republicans. So why should I go vote to vote for my community? There's nobody to vote. I can't go vote for the Latino community. I either have to vote for this jerk or this jerk. Well, forget it. I'm staying home and eating Cheetos, right? Like, there's no point. And if either party, Republicans or Democrats, had shown some openness to comprehensive immigration reform or DREAM Act or something, that probably would have gotten Latino. If Obama had moved before, why wait for next week? Do it now. And he wasn't. You know, I often just feel like, could you guys just call me and I will explain what you need to do, and then we could get this thing moving. Nobody calls me.
It's super frustrating in a state like Texas that is perceived to be a solidly red state, but if you actually looked at the numbers, if Latino turnout in the state of Texas increased by 5 percentage points, we would be a blue state. Yikes. 5 percentage points. It's a lot. It's a big move.
So it's your fault.
Well, no, I think the fault is, I mean, we have Democrats in our state running ads talking about border security, right? We got Black Hawk helicopters in the ad for the Democratic candidate. You know, the Mexican-American Democratic candidate running in the race, right, is talking about border security, and mostly from an economic perspective, right? Because they're caught between a rock and a hard place in that, you know, the best way for many Latinos in the area to move into the middle class is to get a government job dealing with border security. And so they want jobs in that area. So you know, and then you have the psychological gymnastics of putting on that uniform and policing your own communities and deporting people that you know, and then going home and trying to undo that, right?
And we had the same thing in Washington State. Someone in Issaquah, a Mexican immigrant who was running, was talking about being against comprehensive immigration reform because he called amnesty getting put into the carpool lane and skipping ahead of all the people who had gotten in line. And this is a Mexican immigrant. And so, again, I think you have to change the conversation. Look at our demographics and what kind of democracy do we want to have in the future? You know what I mean? Civic engagement is not going to happen when you have people who are completely alienated from the situation.
You have to give people something to vote for.
Yes.
If neither Democrats or Republicans are giving anybody anything to vote for,
they'll stay home, which is what they did.
That's what they did. Guess what? Then you lose.
And we saw actually record turnout during early voting in our area because there was a little kerfuffle about immigration, and then it went away, and on election day, turnout went way down. Right, so we have this little natural experiment. Look, you talked about immigration, and we saw a 3 percentage point increase in early vote. For 2 weeks, Texas has early voting prior to election day. And so we saw a 3 percentage point increase, and then you stopped talking about it for election day, and everyone stayed home. And so all the gains that were made during that early vote were lost, right? So it's super frustrating.
So let me be the skunk in the picnic.
Cool.
Most of, from your conversation and from what you displayed, most of your sample was of Mexican origin. Yet there's plenty of others that are not of Mexican origin that were not included. Is it because of the resources you had at the time when you were doing this? Because after all, your presentation is all Mexican centered. I think just sitting in the audience and going, okay, well, what about all the other groups in LA, for example, that are not Mexican origin and are in the same boat? I realize that the Rio Grande has a problem, the valley.
Yeah, we don't have any.
No, you don't. No, it's all Mexicans, period.
Majority in Washington and Oregon is majority Mexican.
Do you mean
origin.
Undocumented immigrants from other Latino?
Other Latinos as well as from Asia. If Alfred was here, he would start telling you all about it. But he's not, so.
Well, we specifically we wanted only to focus on Latinos. So
that's what
the book was about.
There should be another book probably about the Asian
Yes.
undocumented immigrants, and another one about the, European.
It would be
white-looking,
interesting to see the comparisons in their experiences.
Is there any interface between your research and that of the other communities? Because I know the Asian community has been very vocal in the LA area about it. Koreans and mostly.
Right, but if you look at the marches, like the scholarship that we're building on, or the stuff that we talk about, the 2006 immigration marches, it was mostly Latinos who were marching.
That's because of Piolín, but that's another story.
I don't know that I'm willing to give Piolín all that credit.
Right.
I think Asians are othered as foreigners, but Latinos are criminalized as undocumented. And because Asian communities get that different message, they might not be Americans, but Asian Americans and people of Asian descent in America are not immediately suspected to be undocumented. So we're focusing on that community because this is the community that's criminalized and dehumanized and decitizenized and de-whateverized.
De-Americanized.
Because that is something that is specific to Latinos. Now we did not aim to specifically focus on Mexican descent immigrants. The snowball sampling resulted in that. We do have a few from Honduras and a few other countries, but that was not the intent. But definitely the intent was to focus on Latinos because they're experience is different. And I think the Asian story is also important, but it's a different story.
It has a different slant.
Exactly. So it can't be, it could be in the same book, but it'd be a much thicker book. It has to be a different book.
Well, and also just quickly, it was kind of interesting because someone else asked, well, aren't we othering the others within the Latino community? And I said, well, we actually were able to talk to some of the people about that. And they said, well, we're othered all the time. Like, people just assume if you're brown and your last name is Garcia, you're Mexican. So it doesn't really matter that I'm from Honduras or I'm, you know, from some other place, you know, because people just lump me in with that, right? Anyway, so.
Can I speak about the Asian part? I'm actually in my dissertation stage, and I started with that interest, the undocumented Asian American and Pacific Islander population. It is hard to recruit. I'm just gonna put that out there right now.
So you appreciate our pain.
Yes, absolutely.
That's good. You can write the other book.
Yes, follow.
Nobody wants to admit it, right?
You know, and it's with that exact sentiment of 45% of UC undocumented students are Asian, and it's, you know, it's like, where are they? Like, there's nothing written on this population, and so I think that's part of the issue is the coming out process. I'm lucky that there are people who eventually volunteered to participate in my dissertation, but it's still, like, I have 31 participants and probably, I don't know, 8 Asians. So that's not even 45%.
I can get you one
Yes.
Actually, I'll tell you right now. 4 years ago, he was one of the drum majors on the UCLA band. So look him up, and, because my son was in the band. He told me.
Yes. So that's, I think that's part of the issue, and I do acknowledge that it's a different kind of experience. There are different issues that are, you know, embedded in terms of, like, immigration patterns and reason for not coming out and all those, I guess, nuanced circumstances. But yeah, it's certainly important, and hopefully this will start the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you've done. I think it's, you know, really, really fantastic. You know, to hear the voices of the individuals is, I think, really powerful. I wanted to talk to a couple of points. One of them is how to get more people involved and how to keep, you know, people interested. I think that somehow we need to engage the radio, the television personalities. You know, all these places now we have Chicano radio, Latino radio, by Radio Bilingüe and so forth. I know they've been really instrumental in getting out the vote in other issues. I think that's something, you know, an avenue that we need to work farther, more, especially the academics. You know, they are always being accused of talking to each other, and that's true, but I think we also need to talk to the community people, community folks. And the other one is that I'm a professor here in the School of Ed, and I have a student doing his dissertation on the same kinds of questions you're asking, but at the high school level. And, you know, many of them are just now finding out that they're undocumented. And a large part of his sample is Asian. So we're gonna get some voices of the Asian, but it's very similar. It's very similar, but they do have somehow they get a pass where the Latino doesn't. Right. And I also echo your point about, you know, everybody that's brown with an easy name or at the end of their name is going to be called Mexican. You know, the contractors that hire people, my Mexican can fix that for you. You know, I can have my Mexicans come in and fix your lawn, and they're all Guatemalans. Yeah. And I'm delighted that they have the job.
Same difference.
So anyway, I really appreciate the hard work and very important work. Thank you.
I have a question. So in terms of the participants, at the time of the interviews, the application wasn't open yet for DACA, or was it?
Towards the end.
Towards the end. So were you able to gather any data or any information on, you know, fears around the application process or barriers around the application process? And then have you had a chance to look at, you know, it's been 2 years and a couple months now, to see if out of the 101, how many were actually successful in receiving that DACA protection, or if there's future plans with any of that.
We planned to follow up with them, and we asked all of them to, give us the kind of information that would allow us to find them years down the road. We haven't done that yet. We're kind of still wrapped up in the, we just finished this one, let's talk about the book. But we would like to follow them and see, a few years later what did happen. But definitely, Jessica talked about this a little bit, there was a lot of fear about applying. And when we spoke to them, a lot of them were looking for legal counsel or were getting together to talk to somebody who knew the ins and outs of it to see just how dangerous is this to apply for DACA before the presidential election. Maria was telling students who asked her, wait and see if Obama wins, because you really were opening yourself up potentially if you gave the government all this information and then Romney won and rescinded it, which is what he said he would do. Awesome, then you're out. So there was a lot of fear and concern about that. Yeah.
And there were, I think, even people just on a principled level saying, I don't know if I want to, even if I could. And it could have been the anger of the moment, and maybe when cooler heads prevailed, they decided to go ahead. But what was, I think, most interesting to me was the networks that they were able to put together to try to gather information. I mean, we were in the field about 2 weeks after Obama made this announcement, and they were already getting group meetings and community meetings and seeing lawyers and sharing information. It was pretty amazing how well informed they were about the ins and outs of things in just 2 weeks. So. Go ahead. Wait, you had another question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask really fast. With that same data, was there any information in having those conversations around DACA in higher education? So where people were saying, if I received DACA, I would want to continue on to higher education, because the majority of them had a high school.
Many of them already were.
Okay.
One woman we spoke to had 2 master's degrees, but was working as a nanny. And so what DACA would mean that she could actually do what she was trained to do. And so many of them already were either finishing up college or in graduate school, and then were working in childcare or fast food restaurants. And mostly we're thinking about, okay, finally, I don't have to leave the country to use my knowledge. I can do that work here.
Okay, so my question has to do with how you 3 came into this project, specifically how it developed and how, I don't know what particular previous relationships you had with each other and why you chose this topic, how that happened. Which is probably a long story, but I mean, you can share a little. And the second part of my question is, there is a growing amount of literature around undocumented youth activism, access to higher education, various aspects that look at the experiences of undocumented youth. So I'm wondering what you think your book is a contribution to. I'm not familiar with how many political scientists have written on this topic. I know Cristina Beltran did a few articles and was working around this stuff, but I don't know what you think is the different lens that you offered to this issue.
I think that was yours, Maria.
Yep. Okay, well, as Melissa said, we've known each other for a long time and have been we wanted to do a study on the experiences of undocumented Latino youth. And so at different conferences, we got together to talk about how we would do a study looking at their experiences before DACA. We didn't know DACA was going to happen right when we were, about to. So we were, right after DACA happened, we had already conceptualized the idea of looking at how their political socialization would be the same or different than other Latinos in civic engagement. My first book was on Latino lawyers and their civic engagement and how much they then later became involved politically in their community, how much their trust went up after they were the beneficiaries of a legal degree. And so we wanted to see some of the same questions with undocumented students. Then DACA came. And so we changed our focus to look at, okay, now they have this small degree of protection. How is that changing their lives and their socialization and their trust in government? And so it kind of grew out of that. But we've known each other for a long time and have gone to conferences together and been pregnant together and all that stuff. So all that.
Not on purpose, but
yeah, we were. Yeah. So.
And I think the lens that we offer that's different. I mean, a lot of the work that's out there is in sociology or it's in sort of the higher ed leadership kind of literature. And I think we pull from that, certainly, right? We have to take an interdisciplinary approach given the scant amount of literature there is on undocumented activism. But I think that the lens that we offer is pulling it all together and I think politicizing the issue in a way that really can't happen outside of the framework of political science, right? I mean, ultimately what we're saying when we're talking about identity is that it's about power, right? Political power, and political power means more than just the vote, right? It's about voice and what we mean by democracy and what kind of country we want to live in, right? And I think we sort of get the privilege as political scientists to poke those questions and push that theory and contest ideas of citizenship in ways that are a little bit different maybe than in other fields.
Because at the end of the day, we argue their experience is a process of de-Americanization. And is that the kind of society that we want? A process where people who have known no other country get de-Americanized as they grow up. So.
I have a question. And, I'm writing a story. I wonder if I could set down my recording device on the table.
Come on over.
Let me make sure it's going. I'm just going to set it right here.
Cool.
Don't be intimidated.
Not at all.
So
this dude's been video. Your phone is doing nothing.
So my name's Alex, and I go to Cal State Northridge, which is in the Valley up north. We have oh, awesome. But we have a very big undocumented population there. We think around 1,000. And one issue that students there have been dealing with, and so I'm writing a story on dreamer centers, which is something that they've been dealing with, is in the UC system, there's it seems like a lot of them. I'm not sure if all of them have centers, but I know UCLA has a center. But a lot of the CSUs, which actually have more undocumented students, don't have them. And students are kind of fighting to get it. And in some cases, like in Fullerton, it sounds like they got one and everything seemed to go smoothly. But at schools like CSUN and CSULA, they're really fighting with the administration to get a center, and then they can't get it open, or they don't have like a coordinator. And so I kind of wanted to ask you about what is it that universities need to know? They're admitting these students and acknowledging it, in a lot of cases. But what do they need to know about that experience? How is that experience unique, and how do these students need? What other assistance do these students need?
So you think that the CSUs would have better luck getting these centers opened and staffed if the CSU administrations better understood why they were needed? Or
oh yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but so I guess it's kind of two separate questions. It's it's, I guess just what do schools need to know? So I'll just ask that question, like what do they need to know about? You're admitting these students. Well, what do you need to know? Because I think they do need. I don't want to talk too much.
they need to read our book.
Yes.
They need to understand the realities of the situation, the fear that they live in, the uncertainty they live in, the fact that they're probably from a mixed status household, right? All of the stuff that we talk about in the book, really, they should know, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about undocumented immigrants and a lack of knowledge. But
well, I would add to that, one of the things that we didn't talk about in our presentation but is in the book is being outed by your university without your permission. And this is a really huge issue. A lot of these students are very high achieving, so we had, I'm going to put them on the spot. So several of our students were recruited to participate in Harvard's Latino leadership training. And of course, they were chosen, but they couldn't leave the Valley, right? The Rio Grande Valley, not the Central Valley in Texas, because they didn't have papers to travel, right? They couldn't get beyond the checkpoint. And so the way that administrations handle these kinds of issues about student information is absolutely essential for student success, right? I mean, we had, you know, very high-ranking officials on, you know, email, which is public information, right? It's state system of email talking about people being undocumented, or naming people with their student ID numbers in email, saying how do, and the best intention, right? How do we help Maria Chávez, student ID number, blah, 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 travel to Harvard for her training? Well, now you've just outed her to the entire administration and her faculty, right? And we've just heard a lot of stories of being outed like that. And so even when you have really good intentions, right, really understanding and getting some training on how to protect the identity of your students, right? It doesn't matter if you have a center if now all that information has to be public because it's being funded with state money, right? And in a state like Texas, it would not surprise me at all that UT system gets, you know, a summons or gets some sort of warrant for information from ICE.
Okay.
Right.
Well, and to add to that, I think that if you have good leadership at the administration, you'll have greater faculty support, hopefully. So faculty need to be sensitive. Some of our respondents said they would continually get to campus late, and they'd be late for classes because they can't drive, because they don't have a driver's license, so they have to take public transportation, which is very inefficient, and then they end up late. And so then you have faculty who penalize them. So you have to have an understanding and an acceptance of their certain circumstances. They're not trying to be late for your class every day, that you never know when the bus is going to take them there.
I want to balance that, though, because we also had stories of students who, when they did decide to come out to a professor, often were treated very well, and sometimes the professor helped pay their tuition.
Or got them books.
Yeah. We highlight positive experiences.
So there were some good things too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Not all bad.
No,
faculty and administrators.
No, absolutely not. In fact, there's a section in there that talked about what positive and what negative experiences have you had based on being outed. And some of the positive experiences were professors writing checks for their books and writing checks for their tuition. And so it wasn't, absolutely.
And while that's wonderful, it is still not a structural or systemic answer, right? And we want, that's great, right? That's wonderful that a professor's heart is touched by a student's story, and you can help that one student. But when you have 1,000 students at your university, and we have about 500 at mine, right? And we're getting, the administrations are getting attacked, right? Our university is being called a sanctuary university. People are calling for funding to be pulled from the university because of the number of undocumented students that we have, right? So that's why I talk, because I'm coming from the Texas context, right? I'm talking about really protecting those students as much as possible because they are under attack. And I think, you know, the situation here in California is a little bit different, but, you know, Republicans now run all of Congress, right? So we really don't know what the future holds on this front at this point.
Did that answer your question okay?
Yeah.
You have some stuff to write about.
All right.
Yeah.
So what do you think would happen if we got like a Republican president?
Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, you can't. A Republican right now can't win enough of the Latino vote to win, so not going to happen.
So the next election, like, okay, so 2 more years until.
Oh well, I think right. Well, yeah, or the Supreme Court will step in somehow, or the president will convince Congress to put it into an omnibus bill. I mean, often the way that presidents get Congress to do things that they don't want to do is to match it with something else. So say, okay, well, if you'll agree to comprehensive immigration reform, I'll also give you this, right? That's why we keep getting border security enhancement. So if we build a 500-foot electrified fence across the southern border, then can we regularize the 12 million who are here? And so there are ways, right? Presidents have carrots and sticks. I don't think there's any danger of a Republican winning the White. I mean, something really weird would have to happen, right? And weird things happen, but really, I mean, they don't. The demographics aren't there, and unless enough Latinos are pissed off to stay home, right? The demographics give the White House to the Democrats now pretty safely for a while.
So do you think we'd have enough time to like find another solution before, our Democrat time runs out?
Well, I think what Jessica was talking about, though, I mean, I think that is a possibility that people's attitudes will change, right? And that there would be more support. There's already support for comprehensive immigration reform, but there's still resistance to amnesty, right? Or letting people break the rules and get rewarded. We gave a talk at historically black university, and we were reminded of that hostility and that resentment.
It was not subtle.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was awesome.
But this idea, kind of mirroring what's happening in the LGBT community, that people are coming out as gay, and then, well, Dick Cheney finds out his daughter's gay, he changes his position on gay marriage. Now he's for it, right? You find out that people in your community, people that you already know and love are gay, you're like, oh, well, maybe gay people aren't that bad. Same thing with undocumented immigrants. If you find out all of a sudden, like, hey, Jess, I have to tell you something, right? And that we have some stories about that in here of for example, a young woman having her roommate say these things about these undocumented kids who are competing with her and taking her opportunities, and the girl's like, is that how you feel about me? She's like, what? Well, I'm undocumented. Am I stealing your opportunities? No, not you. And now
they can say it because of DACA.
Right, now they can say it, and now they can be working in the library or working at the coffee shop, or they'll be in your community, and you'll see them and be like, oh, those undocumented immigrants, they're not, what I was told. They're these nice people.
One of the other things to remember is that a lot of conservative white people now have brown grandchildren.
George
right?
P.
And I mean, I really, and that is the trend, right? That is going to continue. Say it again so they can hear it.
30% by 2050. And
Right?
a quarter of public school children are Latinos right now. So.
You remember what happened in the summer of 2001 with Bush?
Yeah.
That he was actually pushing for changes in the
Yes.
immigration.
Yes.
The American Chamber, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was behind all that.
Mm-hmm.
But then in September 11 came along, and that went out the
That was
window.
it. That's right. It
So-
would have happened. It would have happened. George would have done it.
Yeah, he would have done it. So it is likely that if the Republican becomes president, he will be pushed by the business community to fix it, because they're sick and tired of it, of not depending upon their workers showing up next day.
And we have to remember, and I know this is my little pet peeve, but I've been contacted now by like Sun PAC, like that's Jeb Bush's PAC in Florida, and which is a Republican PAC. They're talking to me. They're asking people like me, what do we do on immigration reform? They know that this is a problem, right? And in a state like Florida, where lots of your Republicans are not Mexican, but they are Cuban and they do care about immigration reform, right? They know that they have to do something. And what's really interesting, I mean, it's kind of an interesting switch of affairs that we have going on right now, because they've been able to say, well, it's Obama's fault and it's Obama's fault and it's the Senate. And now they actually have to govern, right? So all of that has to stop. All of that rhetoric has to stop, because there's no one left for them to fight with.
We got to get the Koch brothers to support immigration.
Then my guess is the
we get
business
together.
community is going to get it.
No, I think
because
that's right.
The service sector depends a lot on this population.
Well, as long as there's a path to citizenship, and it's not just another temporary guest worker program or more beefing up at the border, it has to be more inclusive.
Well, that is always covered by we don't want to reward it. But the fact is that if you become a resident, you will eventually have to become a citizen. So any of those paths, by necessity, takes you to citizenship. So them saying that we don't want them to become citizen, it would be totally stupid, because you can't have a second.
That hasn't seemed to stop them.
No.
Not saying something.
And actually, I don't know. I mean, the business community, like if you look at big agribusiness, they're quite happy with having lots of undocumented people working in the fields for not minimum wage and not having to deal with labor regulations. I mean, I don't know that they're going to push for it. I think service sector, I think you're right. But what happens is when they get status, they leave, right? And so that's a problem. So who's going to clean all those rooms in Las Vegas, and who's going to cook all that food at every restaurant, right? You go to a Chinese restaurant, who's back there cooking? A bunch of Mexicans, right?
Or Guatemala.
Where I live, or Guatemala, right? But I'm talking from my context, right? In every restaurant, right? That's who's running everything, who's doing everything. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that some businesses are quite happy to have that advantage, right? I do think that there are some industries, if you look at manufacturing, if you look at food canning, you look at carpeting businesses, I mean, I think that there's some reason for them to argue to want to regularize that status just so that they don't lose the population because they were leaving, right? But I don't know. I think that's a tougher sell.
That's what I was told back in 2001 at the Lula convention by the American Chamber of Commerce representative. He said, we got to do this. And I just looked at him and said, yeah, but the way it's written, I wouldn't go for it. Mm-hmm. But then 2 months later, that's it. I went out the window. 13 years ago.
Darn terrorists, they messed up everything.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for coming and for your questions and comments. And we have books.
Well, their books are, I think there's one.
Thank you.
I'll take that.
Didn't want you to forget it.
If you have another